A woman was working, and meanwhile, two men were watching her. One of them says that the new neighbor was actually very beautiful, and the other says that he was in love with her. One of the men says that he was going to stay with her, but the man says that he knew that he would be the one who was going to be with that woman. The other man then says that they knew this wasn't true and that he wanted to bet with the man. The man said he'd take it, bet, and then he goes to the woman. He then introduces himself and asks, what was such a beautiful woman as her doing there? She said that she had just moved into that house and that she was looking for someone to help her because she was having a hard time finding a man who could help her. She says she was in need of help with a chair as she was really too heavy. The man said that he was there so he could help his neighbor and that if she wanted, he could help her. She says that he was a really very charming young man and says that she was very happy to meet him. He said it was also a pleasure to meet the woman and kisses her on the hand. At that moment, the man's mother appears and calls him in. He is embarrassed by this, but tells the woman that he needs to go because his mother is calling. The woman said it was a pleasure to meet the man and then he leaves. At this moment, a police officer who was watching the woman realizes who she really was and tells her that she would not escape this time. Later, the man was in his bed when his mother shows up and sees what he was doing. He was looking at the pictures of the woman who had just moved in, and he was saying that she was very pretty. He says that woman was perfect for him, and then his mother comes up and asks what he was doing. He is frightened by this and says that he was not doing anything while trying to hide his phone, but she says that was wrong and takes the phone from his hand. The man tells his mother that she couldn't do that because she was invading his privacy, but his mother says that what he was doing was wrong because that was his teacher. He says it's that she wasn't his teacher and what his mother was doing was wrong as she couldn't take his phone that way. His mother then tells him that he was living in her house and that he needed to show respect for her and that this woman was much older than him. The man then asks for her phone back, saying she couldn't invade his privacy. His mother says that as long as he lives in her house, he would have to obey her and then leaves with his cell phone, leaving the man furious about it. Sometime later, the woman was outside her house waiting for someone. At that moment, she realizes that the man was passing by and calls out to him. He walks up to her and then she asks if he was struggling in school. He asks her if she was a teacher and she said yes and that she could help him solve all the problems he had. He gets very excited about it and asks if she could really help him and she said yes and that he wouldn't regret having her help. The man thinks about it for a while and then asks the woman if she could help him with a problem he was having. She says yes and asks if he would like to come into her house. He is very excited that he accepts the invitation. When they enter the house, the officer tells her that the woman would no longer run away from her. Sometime later, the man was walking with his friend and then his friend asks what was going on. The man told his friend that he was very happy with what was happening to him. He then asks what was going on and then the man says that he had won over his new neighbor. The other man asks him what he had done, as he did not believe his friend. The man said that he was telling the truth, that now the neighbor was helping him with everything he needed. The other man says that this was wrong and that the man would soon be kicked out of his house if he continued together with the neighbor, but the man says that this would not happen. At that moment, the man's mother appears and says that she was looking for him. The man said he was already on his way back to his house and then his mother says they had to talk. She said she had just received the grades the man was getting at school. She said she wouldn't be able to keep playing him if he was going to get such bad grades. He told her she didn't have to worry about things. He had someone who would help him. His mother says that she didn't care what he was talking about and that if he continued to get bad grades, he would have problems with her. He tells her that she didn't have to worry about that, because he already had someone who would help him improve his grades. His mother then says that she had already told him to stop hanging out with his friend as he was a bad influence on him. The man says that his friend wasn't a bad influence on him, that he was actually helping him study, but his mother says that she had already said that she didn't like that friend of his and that he was a bad influence. She then tells him to go home and they leave. Sometime later, the man goes to the woman's house. Desperate. He then proceeds to knock on the door and call out to her. She goes up to him and asks him what he wanted. He asks if he could come into her house so they can talk. She says they could talk, and then they go into the woman's house. Inside the house, she asks him what he wanted to talk to her about, as she was very curious. He then said that he didn't know how to say this to her, but that the truth was that he was in love with her and that he could no longer live without her by his side. The woman starts laughing at that situation and says that the man should be joking with her, but he says that he wasn't joking and that he really wanted to be by her side for the rest of his life. She then says that this was wrong and that he was old enough to be her son and that they could never be together. He said he didn't care how old she was and that he wanted to be by her side forever. She says it would never work, but soon changes her mind and tells the man that if he could prove to her that he was a real man, they could be together. He gets very excited about it and says that he was going to prove to her that he was a real man and that he was going to make her very happy. She tells him that they would have to make a deal and that if the man could prove to her that he was a real man, they could be together. He says he just needed a chance so he could prove to her that he was a real man. She says he only had a week to prove it to her, and if he succeeded, they would be together. Later, the man was at his house thinking about what he could do to prove to the woman that he was a real man. He then says that he would get to work and that it would prove to her and they would be together forever. At that moment, the man's mother goes to his room and starts knocking on the door, telling him that they needed to talk. She then asked the man where his school uniform was, but the man said he would not go back to school as he was going to start work. He tells her that if she didn't support him, he would leave that house and never come back. She is very surprised by this and says that he was not able to work, because he was still a child and that he did not know how to take care of himself. She tells him he needed to go back to school so he can study, but the man says he wouldn't do that. He says that if his mother didn't support him, he would leave. He then says that he needed to go as he was already late for his work. He leaves and his mother calls for him, but he doesn't come back. When he leaves, his mother says that she was very worried about him. Later, he was with the woman and he told her that he had already made a little money, but she said that was too little. She says that what he had achieved that day would not be able to pay for what she needed and that if he wanted to be by her side, he would have to find more money. He says that that was all he had achieved that day and that they could enjoy some of that money and that the next day he would get more money for her to do whatever she wanted. She says it didn't work that way and that if she wanted to be with her, he was going to have to get a lot more money every day or they weren't going to be together. He then says that this was not their agreement and that she was already changing the terms of their agreement. She then tells him that if he were a real man, he would be able to bring her a lot more money every day. He says that he was a real man and that he would bring more money to her every day, and so they would be together and he would make her very happy. Meanwhile, the man's mother was looking for him. She was wondering where he could be. She then passes in front of the woman's house and realizes that she was hearing her son's voice inside. She overhears what they were saying and is surprised by it. She then says that she was going to make the woman pay for what she was doing to her son. She then goes to a police officer who was nearby and said she needed to talk to her as she had an urgent report to make. She says that she had a woman who had just moved into that house and that she was afraid of what she might be doing to her son as they were together in her house. She said she was very scared of what might be happening and that she needed the help of the police. The officer then begins to wonder what the man's mother was talking about and says that she actually knew who she was talking about. She says that this woman was a very bad person, that they needed to go to her to arrest her. They then go to the woman's house and tell the woman to open the door. The policewoman then enters the woman's house and the man's mother says that she knew what was going on there and that the woman was a bad person for doing that to her son. The officer says that she knew very well that it was that woman, as she had been arrested before. She says the woman picked up young people to work for her, while she stayed at home doing nothing, but the woman says that was a lie. At that moment, the man appears asked what his mother was doing there. His mother said she was there so she could rescue him, and then the officer takes the woman away. The man then asks his mother what had happened there, and his mother says that unfortunately, she found out a lot of bad things about that woman, but that she managed to arrive in time to be able to save her son. She then asks her son to come home so they can start over, and the man accepts and apologizes to his mother.